Welcome, everybody. My name is Israel Bell. I am the interim superintendent here in the Kent School District, and I am excited to have you here with us in our first of several community conversations that we have coming up. Happy to have you here, our KSD community. And I'm going to go ahead now and turn it over to Dr. Wade Behringer to get us started.
Thank you, Israel. Welcome, everybody. Thank you again for joining us today in our first of 3 community conversations. Before we get started, I want to do a little housekeeping. So during our presentation, if everyone could keep themselves muted during these 3 presentations, that would be great. Also, if you're Zoom savvy, feel free to change your display name to include your either organizational affiliation or where you're from. So again, welcome to our KSD community conversations. For those of you that are not able to join us, or for those that want to go back and review the conversation, this meeting is being recorded to share with our KSD community on our website. We'll have 3 short presentations today: school boundaries, the educational programs and operations EPO levy, and the superintendent search. After the 3rd presentation, we'll have time to take questions from the audience. So you can raise your hand with the reaction buttons or submit questions via chat. We'll work to answer as many questions as possible during that conversation time. And we're also compiling frequently asked questions, and we'll post those questions and answers on our website. So in addition, comments and questions, if you have any reflections or you want to respond later, you can complete the form that is linked on our website. So you can go to that. And that form will close on November 9th, 2021 at 11 p.m. So once we get to the question and answer session at the very end, or later on in this presentation, I'll go back over the process for asking questions as well. So with that said, at this time, I'd like to introduce our Interim Chief of School Operations and Academic Support, Randy Heath, who will share some information about our boundary process. Randy?
All right, thank you, Wade. All right, so we're going to go in and talk to you a little bit about school boundaries. And so let's go to the next slide. Okay, so just a little history on school boundaries and the work that has been done so far. Last year, Kent School District entered into an agreement with an outside firm, MGT, to conduct a boundary study to make recommendations for possible adoption by the board. We collected information from a variety of sources, focus groups, thought exchanges, surveys, online community forums throughout this process. Ultimately, last year, the board decided to take a partial recommendation of MGT that involved opening up our new elementary school, River Ridge Elementary, which is a beautiful facility. If you have not seen it yet, please drive by and take a look. But it resulted in 7 current schools, elementary schools, changing their boundaries to allow for the River Ridge to be filled. Those students, by moving and opening up River Ridge, that meant that we did close down Kent Valley Early Learning Center, which is located in downtown Kent, and the kindergarten students that were Neely O'Brien and Kent Elementary students returned to those 2 boundary schools. Also, there was some questions last year during the process around our dual language program and our commitment to it with the students that may have been displaced through a boundary process. I am happy to report that any students who in the dual language program at any of our schools, Kent Elementary, Neely O'Brien, Scenic Hill, that were changed their boundaries, are being provided transportation to go to the dual language program. So no student was displaced from that program. Next slide. So we want to go back and really highlight 3 different parts of the recommendations from MGT that have not been taken action on yet by the school board. And those really involve 3 big areas. The move of 6th grade students to the middle school, which would entail the reopening of Sequoia Middle School, which is the former KPA site. It is a school site that has been being used as a school for ever since Sequoia closed down. And so it is fully ready and operational and ready for the school to reopen if needed. Secondly, we are creating, suggestion was to create 4 clear feeder patterns based on the comprehensive high schools. And then third would be to balance out the enrollments at elementary schools district-wide to create equity. So let's dive into each of those a little deeper. The move to 6th grade is something that has been looked at for years. In fact, it was part of a discussion in a previous boundary study years ago when 9th graders moved to the high school. And the plan at the time was to move 6th graders to the middle school. At that time, it was paused. But we really feel like this is important. And one of the things that we want to make sure that this is a priority for programmatic reasons and not necessarily around space needed or around enrollment issues. It is a priority for the district as it creates the most appropriate program, we believe, for 6th grade students. State learning standards and assessments are structured on an environment of K-5, 6-8, and 9-12. And because of that, most curriculum that is designed and purchased by the district is actually aligned to those grade bands. And so making sure that we have 6th and 8th all together will help with the implementation of our curriculum. Another big giant rock around why this is important is relationship building is really important. We know that. We've come to understand that, but we especially understand that for middle school age students. 2 years currently having only 2 years in a middle school setting is difficult to build those strong relationships that are needed for kids to be successful. They are immediately transitioning into 7th grade and immediately transitioning out of 8th grade. So that extra year will help build those meaningful relationships. And really developmentally, 6th grade students align more closely with 7th and 8th grade students than kindergarten through 5th grade students. 6th grade social emotional needs are better accommodated at the middle school. When you talk to our principals who are deeply understanding this, there is universal, pretty much top tier rating by all of the principals that this is the right move to move 6th graders into the middle school, and it is their deep recommendation that this occur, as well as ours. Okay, next one. The next big rock is creating 4 feeder patterns based on comprehensive high schools. So when we talk about feeder patterns, what we're talking about is that a certain group of schools will feed directly into a middle school, and that full middle school will then feed into a high school. And so by doing this, we are aligning schools into clear feeder patterns that allows kids to stay together. And from the time they start in elementary school, and if they remain in the same house, in the same home or location, that they will continue all the way through, and they will know which middle school and which high school they are going to, and they'll stay with the same group of kids. This helps create a sense of belonging, especially in areas such as sports, music, art, band, extracurricular activities. It also allows our schools to really work much clearer on transitions between the levels. We know that that is a critical area, that kids are successful when we do the work to transition them successfully from one level to the next. And so what that would allow is middle school principals to be able to work closely with their 4 or 5 elementary schools that feed into their middle school, and they'll be able to talk, really and make it a full year transition in that year leading up to the move. And right now that is problematic because some of our elementary schools feed into multiple middle schools, and some of our middle schools feed into multiple high schools. And it just makes that work that much more difficult. Educational programs can be distributed equally into those 4 high school feeder strands, resulting in more equitable access. And it really allows for this greater vertical planning and collaboration between those strand schools, really in a variety of subjects, including curriculum, student supports, a number of different areas. It just makes it much easier for that collaboration to occur. And finally, the last big rock that we want to kind of highlight this morning is the the balanced enrollments at elementary schools to create equity. And why this is an equity issue really is around taking a look and making sure that we have appropriate sized elementary schools, that there's space available to run the programs that are needed at that school. Right now, we are making some decisions around special programs and either our inclusive education, our high cap programs and others based on where we have space, where we have physical space in a building. What we would like to work to is placing those in the schools, in the neighborhoods where the students are being drawn from. So really trying to keep kids closer to their neighborhood school, and that will reduce things such as travel time on transportation and buses, and just really allowing them to kind of stay within their community. Lower number of students at the elementary will also have less reliance on portable classrooms, which is I know a goal that many has stated in the surveys we were doing up to the boundary. And then also it allows for greater space at these buildings for community partnerships, such as daycares and early childhood education programs, so that they can provide those programs in their neighborhoods with the kids at the schools where these students will be attending school in the future. So these are the three big areas that really are left to still be addressed through a boundary change process. And so we wanted to bring that this morning to kind of get your feedback on these big three areas that will be brought back to the board. Thank you.
Thanks, Randy. Again, if the audience has any questions, feel free to put those in the chat or just jot them down until we get to our question and answer session after our three presentations. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Chief Accountability Officer, Dr. Jewel Harmon, who will share some information with us about the upcoming EP&O levy. Jewel?
Thank you, Dr. Badger. Good afternoon, all. I'm excited to talk about our educational programs and operations levy. And as you saw from the previous slide, it's a 2023 replacement levy. This is a reminder, our levies operate on a calendar year cycle. And so our current levy that our community authorized will expire in December of 2022. And because our school year splits 2 calendar years, the fall of 1 calendar year, and then the winter and spring of a separate calendar year, it's time for us to begin thinking about what that 2023 levy will look like. And that's important because, as you see, when we have strong schools, our communities thrive. Excellence is one of our 3 core values in Kent School District. And in order for us to provide an excellent and robust experience for our students, it takes more funding than the state provides. And our community has been supportive of us providing a program that exceeds what the state funds. And we do that through rigorous academic, social, and career readiness experiences. We have a diverse and premier workforce: teachers, peer educators, principals, custodians, nurses, social workers, and educational support staff that are also beyond what the state provides. And we do this all through the funding and commitments of our community, because we know that better schools help build a stronger community, which will improve the quality of life for all. Next slide. And so in short, the levy that we are going to go out for in February of 2022 will be asking for a 2-year authorization, so the calendar year of 2023 and the calendar year of 2024, for a total of $76.25 million each year. And we estimate that that tax rate will be about $1.88 per $1,000 assessed value for property owners. So before we get into some of the technicalities of what that levy tax rate looks like and what that means financially, let's talk about what our levy funds. Our levy funds, like I said before, everything that the state does not. And during our last levy campaign, we actually asked our community what they wanted Kent to invest more in. And it came back from our community that they were interested in smaller class sizes, career readiness leading to STEM career opportunities for students, student safety, student health services, athletics and extracurricular activities, and fine and performing arts. And those were the investments that we made in our current levy. And because our 2023 EP&O levy request from our community is a replacement, we will be looking to fund those same things for the same dollar amount overall, the $76.25 million over those next 2 years, 2023 and 2024. Next slide. So specifically, what do smaller class sizes mean in KSD? That means that we provide about 150 more basic education teachers than the state funds. And that equates to smaller class sizes beyond the state ratio. And that was an interest of our community, and that's a great thing for our students to experience. Next slide. In addition, we also fund some career readiness experiences. We have the unique opportunity sitting in Kent where both Blue Origin and Boeing are large companies that have STEM career fields that sit in our backyard. And so by providing those career readiness opportunities for our students, we're creating a better partnership and relationship with those employers. Our students will have better access and be prepared to move into those career fields. Next slide. Even before COVID pandemic was a reality, our community was investing in keeping our students healthy and safe. And so we provide 17 nurses not supported by state funding. The state funding model funds approximately a little more than, well, they provide 4 nurses for our students. We fund 17 additional nurses outside of that, thanks to the levy support. Next slide. Like I said about student health and then student safety go hand in hand. The state funds 4 positions for that. As a district, we also fund an additional 8 positions to support student safety across campuses. And it's completely funded through our levy supports from our community. Next slide. And then of course, extracurricular activities and opportunities for our students. Though they are supported through general fund dollars as well as fundraising activities through the students who participate and families that participate and ASB fundraising. That does not fully cover the cost of those experiences. And so our levy allows us to provide those supports and experiences for students beyond that. So we're reducing the burden, the additional burden for participation for students across the district. Next slide. And then last but not least is fine and performing arts. So most of our arts programs are not state funded. And so all of those things and pieces that we provide beyond the basic instructional pieces and those extracurricular performance pieces are outside of state funding and are funded through our levy. Next slide. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the financial pieces of our levy. And the first piece of this is that Kent has been a solid steward of our taxpayer dollars and the investment that our community has made in education. Our most recent Moody's upgrade was a testament to our financial practices and how we are continuing to move in the right direction with stability and strong financial results and how we move forward. Next slide. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the specifics of the actual levy and what this means for our taxpayers and our community. And so the $76.25 million that we are asking is the amount that we intend to collect, and that is the amount that we're currently collecting and that our community currently authorized in our current levy. And what we're proposing and asking our community for moving forward is the same thing. So we are not increasing the overall tax rate for our community. It will remain flat over those next 2 years as well, in calendar year 2023 and calendar year 2024. Next slide. But our tax rates are actually made up of 3 different components. There's the educational and programs levy, which is in that royal blue at the bottom. There is the capital and tech levy, which is in the middle pieces, and then there's the green pieces which represent our bond. And what we're talking about right now are the royal blue pieces at the bottom. And as you'll see, what we're asking for moving forward is that $1.88 per $1,000 of assessed value. So overall, we are asking our community to continue to sustain the programs that we're operating. So we're not asking for an increase in the dollar amount to fund these programs. We're asking for a dollar amount that will allow us to sustain and continue the operations moving forward. Next slide, please. So where does that tax rate sit Kent School District when comparing other school districts across the region and that are near us? And so as you see, the two bars in the middle, the bar to your left represents the kind of regional average of those districts. And then Kent sits to the right of that. That other light blue bar is Kent School District. And so we are in the middle. Our tax rate that our community authorized is actually in the middle of neighboring districts and surrounding districts in South King County. Next slide. And then when you look at this, the rates for the educational programs and operations portion of this in comparison to other, again, regional districts in South King County and in, I guess, Northern Pierce County, those larger districts, you see that Kent is on the low end of those as well. So we are situated in a space and place where we are not at the top end of burden for our taxpayers and our community, but we're also not at the low end, and we're able to offer a robust program experience for our students. Next slide, please. And then last but not least, I'll just close with just some information about the key dates moving forward. And so we must file with the King County to place a measure on the ballot on December 10th. And then we hope that our levy will be authorized and approved by final vote and certified by February 18th. You'll have access to the dates in the middle. And for now, I am going to stop and we'll address questions at the end of this.
Thank you, Jewel. Again, if the audience has questions, please feel free to put those in the chat or just wait until we get the question and answer, which is one more session away. And then we can take those questions at that time. So at this time, I'd like to turn it back over to Dr. Harmon, who's going to share some information about the upcoming superintendent search process.
Thank you, Dr. Behringer. So last week, our board participated in a special work session to discuss the request for proposals to move the search for a permanent superintendent for Kent School District forward. In that discussion, they are looking to hire a company that will support the board and engage the community in identifying the best candidate for Kent School District moving forward in a permanent superintendent capacity. And so as the board engages in that process for the RFP, last night, they actually approved that request for proposal. And I believe today that the request for proposal is going forward so that we can receive information back from companies that are interested in taking on that work. In that request for proposal work session and in the document put forth, the board is hoping to have those proposals received from those interested companies by November 22nd, that is a Monday. And then the board will take some time to review those proposals and identify finalists from that selection, and that they will be prepared to provide some oral presentation to the board and community on December 7th about their interest in the work for the superintendent search. And after that portion, then the selection of that company will be made, a contract for their services will move forward, and then the superintendent search will move forward after that. The board's general goal in identifying a permanent candidate is to identify that candidate and have them named and selected by, I would say, late spring of 2022. The board is still working through those details. There are several moves that are happening, but that is where we are, where the board is with that process, because identifying a superintendent is actually the board's work, not staff work. And the one thing that the board is interested in right now that will help as we have these community conversations is engaging our community so that they can inform the company that will participate in this search and take on that work, with how the community would like to be engaged and provide input on the characteristics and qualifications of that candidate, how they might be engaged in providing feedback on the process. And so as the community participates in the conversation today, getting feedback on how you'd like to be engaged in the superintendent search would be helpful to the board and ultimately the company that takes on this work and gets awarded the contract. And so with that, I will end the superintendent search update portion. And I'll turn it back over to Dr. Behringer for our next instructions of what's next.
Thank you, Jewel. All right, that completes our 3 short presentations for our first community conversation. And we're now moving on to the opportunity for questions and answers and comments from our audience. So at this time, we can do a couple different things. You can raise your hand using the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. It's a smiley face with a little plus sign off the side of their forehead. Or you can put your questions in the chat if you would like one of our communications team members to read the questions from the chat. Either way is fine. I'll be working to answer or call on people who are raising their hands via the reaction hand raising. And then once we've completed those who have raised their hands, we will move to the questions that are also in the chat. So if there aren't any questions, we'll kind of move through no particular order. We have staff to support responding to questions you may ask or comments as we move through, depending on the topic. So I'm going to pull up the participant section right now. And sorry, my screen just changed on me. And I'll be looking for hands. I see a hand, and I apologize ahead of time if I pronounce your name incorrectly. Please let me know how to pronounce it so I can do that correctly in the future. Tao Tran.
Yes. So
yeah.
Yes. So my question is, who, if more money mean better education for the kid, and who make sure the money we use in the right, like who would be accountable for that? A lot of parents cannot move or put their kid in private school or homeschool, so they have to stop with Kent School District. So, how do we guarantee that the parent voice will be heard? Who follow that through that?
So I'm going to interpret this as a Levy question.
Yes.
And I would say that ultimately there are several parties that are accountable for this. And so as Chief Accountability Officer, the Division of Finance and that team falls under my area. So I would say that we are operationally responsible for how our funds are used across Kent School District. But our budget process involves quite a vast group of individuals. Every year when we develop our budget, we involve our board, we involve our community in the interest and priorities of things that they are interested in moving forward. We go through a budget process where our public is allowed to provide comments on the items that we are funding and to what extent. And then monthly during our board meetings, we provide presentation to our board, and the public has access to how we spent those monies on a monthly basis and how we're doing in accordance with the budget that was approved on an annual cycle. Specifically under the law related to levy, we are required to provide and keep a separate levy budget of how we spent those dollars. And so that's another accountability component of this. This particular round of levy, because we're not asking for an increase in authority, we didn't come to our community asking what new things they wanted to add, because in truth, the dollar amount we're requesting doesn't allow us to expand and add new programs. It only allows us to continue what we're currently offering. And so I hope that addresses the question, but if not, then we can continue.
Thank you, Dr. Harmon. Leslie Bingham.
Yes, thank you. I have a question regarding the boundary changes. I know you talked about the special programs and wanting to make sure that there's space at schools in the neighborhoods, not just where there's physical space to put them. But I'm curious then to why that hasn't been a part of the boundary changes. It seems that unless you're factoring those programs in while you're determining the boundaries, you might still be stuck with schools or areas that don't have space. Like specifically the highly capable program can bring in a lot of students and classes to a school. So I'm just curious how that would be factored in to make sure that there is actually space in a neighborhood to house those programs.
Yes, that's a good question. Yeah, that is all part of this work. Part of it is moving the 6th grade to the middle school will create some of that space, and then balancing enrollment will be the rest of that. You know, we have the ability to connect, you know, where students are right now, if they are in special programs at a particular school, and kind of factor those separately than the boundary students that are at that school. And so we believe by creating this space across the district, we will be able to have more options in terms of finding space at neighborhood schools to keep programs as close as possible to the neighborhoods of the kids they are serving, the families they're serving.
Just to be clear though, those determinations will be made after the boundaries are determined, or is that going to be a part of the determination?
Yeah,
I asked this question last year when the proposal was put out and was told, oh, that'll be decided later. So
right.
that's kind of my question.
Right, and that's the, you know, that's the work that is, you know, we are doing within the district. We have, you know, our student management system connects every student to a boundary path that is there, and we're doing that analysis. Our research department is doing that analysis as well right now. There may be some tweaks and changes to what was proposed last year. That is all being considered and looked at currently. And so it's not necessarily that we're going to come forward with the exact same boundary recommendations in terms of neighborhoods and such that we came with last year. That is being analyzed right now, especially considering that maybe some enrollment changes have happened, and we want to make sure that we have the best possible information to go from.
Okay, let me say it maybe a little more direct.
Okay.
When those new boundary changes are presented to the community, will they also include where those special programs will be?
No, not at this point yet, because I think what we would want to, we need to first off see, the idea is to create space at every building, because what that may end up being is that special programs one year might serve kids from a particular neighborhood, and so it makes sense to put it at this school. 5 years later, we might do another analysis and see the kids that are being served in those programs actually have shifted, and they are, you know, maybe over in this area. Having the flexibility and the space at the elementary schools to pretty much, you know, be able to move those programs when the students that are in those programs change, I think is part of being an effective district of trying to figure out and serve kids in their communities. So it's creating space at every elementary so that we have options that make the most sense for the current students that we're serving at the time.
Okay, thank you.
Roseanne Nelson.
Yes, thank you. This is Roseanne Nelson. I'm a KSD parent and a part of and live in the Carriagewood neighborhood. And you know, the boundary proposal last year brought a lot of concern, I know, to many in our particular neighborhood. And I'm happy to hear that you said that, you know, there's changes that could be made, that you're looking at not just last year's proposal and moving it forward, but that you are considering certain areas. And I really hope that you would definitely highlight, and I'll say that again, highlight this particular neighborhood, you know, because, you know, being a part of Carriage Crest and then being able to go to Northwood, which is, you know, less, you know, 0.9 miles. My son walks home in 10 minutes. And then the proposal to move us to Meeker, which is several miles away, just made no sense at all. So you really saw that neighborhood collaboration come, you know, to the surface last year during this proposal. And so I guess that was my question. Are you going to keep those feeders exactly as they are, or are you going to consider us, especially, you know, those of us who are so much closer to a current school, and, you know, make those changes appropriately so that we can at least feed into a school closer than what was proposed.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, like I said, we are looking at those, and we've taken the comments from our last year's different community conversations, and we're looking at particular neighborhoods. I do want to highlight, though, that unfortunately, in the process of school boundaries, because schools were built at various times within the growth of a community, and new growth happens in terms of housing developments and other things, and there's also some aspects of where we could find land to buy when we opened up and built new schools. There are often times that students are actually much closer to a particular school and end up in a boundary of another school. That is not unique to Kent. That is something that happens everywhere. So that is one of the factors we look at in terms of determining distance to the schools where the students are assigned, but that is just one of the factors that we need to look at, because we would love for it to be that they could attend the closest school to them, but that is just not always possible based on just the neighborhoods and how they're laid out.
Yeah, well, thanks for your comment. And I would, definitely encourage you to look at this area, especially like Lake Young's and certain places that, are much closer to that particular school. And yet they are also being fed into Northwood. So, the idea of keeping all the kids together and making sure that the schools feed into each school is wonderful. But at the same point, it's also a growth experience. If you don't go exactly to the same school as everyone in your elementary, it's good for students to meet other people and to grow and expand. But ultimately 0.9 miles versus 2.5 just doesn't seem, so definitely keep that in mind when you're making those choices, because, this neighborhood will definitely speak up.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, in monitoring the hands, I don't see any hands left in the participants, and just reviewing the chat as well. Many of those questions were answered. Maybe Melissa, do we want to share the last one on there in regards to 6th grade moving up to middle school?
Yes, thanks, Dr. Behringer. I'm happy to read that. Christy asked, in regards to 6th grade moving up to middle school, principals have voiced their opinions that the kids were not ready this year after being at home so long. That across the board, kids seem immature and have lost a lot of learning. Have you considered how you will determine when the kids will be ready, academic and test scores, emotional readiness, etc.? And will you be working with the principals and counselors to ensure you do what is right for our kids by not moving them up too soon?
Yes, absolutely. I will tell you, our principals are deeply invested in supporting students. That is front and center on their minds. I have lots of conversations with principals all the time. They are in the process of, well, we've returned to full-time in-person learning. There's really a lot of assessment that is going on right now. And I'm not just talking about like test scores. There's a lot of assessment that is being done by our school staff around the social, emotional, academic, and other needs of students that have returned this fall. And strategies and supports are being put into place. And this is front and center. And so when we're looking to bring these proposals forward and implement these proposals, this is all being considered. And we're working closely with our school staff, our administrators, to understand what would be a timeline that would be appropriate to make this transition. And in some cases, the thought process might be, well, kids aren't ready to move because they need this familiarity with this. But then you also may look and say, but actually we have some more supports available at the middle school level, and maybe that's the reason why we would want to move students at a different pace. So yes, that is absolutely being assessed by our staff. We have a group of elementary and middle school principals that are very knowledgeable about a lot of these things, and they are very much a part of this plan and developing this timeline, and will be as this process continues.
Thanks, Randy. Chris.
Hi, good afternoon. My child is just starting elementary, so this is all new conversation for me. I don't know if I missed it. What is the boundary change timeline for when will these things be decided upon, and then when will they be implemented ideally?
Absolutely. Thank you. Good question. And this today and our other community conversations and other information that we are gathering from both our staff and our public will help determine that timeline. And so, you know, these are critical conversations that we're having, and hearing from the public is very important, because we want to choose the timeline that is going to work the best for everyone, because these boundary changes don't happen very often, every 10, 15 years. And so, you know, it's better to do it right and cover everything than maybe to do it at a certain pace. So basically, the feedback we're getting will help us determine the timeline that will then be shared with the public.
And so realistically, I mean, are we thinking 2, 4, 5 years? Or I'm kind of just trying to get a gauge in general, how fast these things progress.
Right. You know, I think probably not 5. 5 is on the long end. I think it would be, you know, there's a possibility that if things aligned, it would happen, you know, for the next school year, but it could happen for the following school year. This is part of the gathering of input from the community. So if community members have some suggestions around what they felt like would be a good timeline, then we're more than welcome to listen to those and try to develop a timeline with our board that makes sense for this implementation, this very important implementation.
Gotcha. And so these conversations continue iteratively. You guys come up with a plan, present it, and then there's another iteration of feedback. And so depending on how quickly those decisions will align with the timeline, I guess.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Tao Tran.
Yeah, sorry, one more question. For the 6th grade move to middle school, are there more opportunity for 6th grade, such as like taking algebra in 6th grade?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, that is. We have some more options when 6th graders move up. There's more options around electives. There's more options around extracurricular activities often. There's also more opportunities for acceleration at times when students maybe need a more rigorous coursework. All those opportunities open up a little more when 6th graders are moved to the middle school.
Okay, maybe I missed it, but do you know when that will happen?
That's part of these community conversations, is trying to gauge from the community their input on a number of things. And then from this input, we will make some recommendations to the board about the timeline for implementation. So we're trying to gather as much input as we can.
Would it happen at the same time as the boundary changes? You implement all of that all at the same time?
Most likely they would all come together. Yes, they would all be done at the same time, the rest of the recommendations.
Okay. Gershanjit Singh.
Hi, I joined a little bit late. So my question is regarding the boundaries. So I know that there were, so when the consultants presented the reports or their suggestions about like how to move the boundaries. And then there was later communication from the district that the board only accepted like few changes or modified changes. So my question is, when we are talking about these school boundary changes, are we talking about the ones that were suggested by the consulting firm?
Yeah, we talked about that currently our research department at the district is really looking into those numbers, looking at the recommendations that were made, looking at particular neighborhoods and seeing if any tweaks to those recommendations need to be made and brought before the board. So that is all being looked at currently.
So has there been any drafts of like the new boundary changes that we can take a look at just to see like what's happening or what's being proposed?
Yeah, not yet. No, those have not been presented to the board yet. Right now, we are really trying to gather input around the big concepts of why we're doing the boundary and making sure that our community is on board with why we are doing it and thinking if it is a good thing or if they have concerns about that and sharing that with our board. And you know that brings up a good point, is that we really do want to hear both from the people who maybe have concerns, but also from the community that really feel like this is a good move. So like if you feel strongly that the 6th grade really belongs at the middle school and this would be what's best, please, and you talk in your community to other community members, please have them and encourage them to participate in our surveys, reach out to our board and let them know that sometimes we just hear from community members that maybe have concerns. And it's just important to hear from people that are really on board and think this is a great idea. So
I guess I would repeat the point that was made earlier. I think the distance from the school is one of the things that I would also point out, just because like meaning my daughter, like she goes to a school that's like near us, and the proposal that the consultants made, the school would end up being further away from us than where we are right now. So I would definitely support that point that the distance from the school should be considered.
yes.
Okay, thank you. Christy Loganville.
Sorry, had to unmute. I've heard in the past that when the last boundary changes were made, a citizens advisory group was created to help on the planning. And I was wondering if you will be looking to maybe create one or bring in more community support and feedback, not just in surveys or on these Zoom calls, but when you start actually planning, bringing in, physically bringing in the community to be a part of it.
Yes, absolutely. Those have been part of our conversations. Actually, that comes into the implementation stage of things. And as you know, decisions are made, and then the work of trying to make sure that we implement them, these changes effectively, then that's a different phase of work that starts. And so what we found is it's great when we can be more specific with our public and our families about what the task is. So maybe there's a real passion among some parents around, I want to make sure that the transition to 6th grade is done in a way that is, going to be the most effective for our students. We may have a subcommittee of this work just on the transition of what would be 5th and 6th graders in 1 year to the middle school, and bring in some parent voice into that. And even we really want to bring in some student voice into that as well. We are actually fortunate this year, our Kent Laboratory Academy, which just opened up a new building, they are a 3rd through 12th grade school. They're a unique school. And they actually, when they moved to their new location, they restructured and went into a 6th through 8 middle school. And so we actually have some we have some 6th graders currently right now who kind of has experienced that transition, and gathering that student voice from that group of students who are currently doing that, I think will be helpful as well.
Will you, though, be including the community, such as our neighborhood here in Carriagewood, when it comes time to, the final planning, not just the implementation, but would there be a forum for us to include ourselves more in the planning, not just, on a survey?
I guess I'm getting, so the what specific aspect of the planning, I guess, is I'm gonna ask the question.
In the past, there was a community group that was created to assist with the planning. Will the community be more involved in this planning when it was MGT, it was just dictated to us?
Right. So you're thinking that like you're wanting voice on which school?
Just involving the community more than how we felt it was handed to us last year,
Okay.
I think is really important.
Okay. We'll take that back and discuss that suggestion.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands at this time, but I do see a new message. Melissa, would you be willing to share Kim Wells' statement? Question?
Sure, absolutely. So it reads, regarding timeline, one thing I have heard consistently from parents and staff is that enough notice would be necessary to prepare the fifth graders and families who would be moving up to middle school, something that happens with sixth graders each year. Are there thoughts around the latest date it would make sense to make this decision out of respect for this need for transition? That was one issue with the timeline last year. Staff and families would have had 1 to 2 months at most for the transition.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the reasons why we're having these community forums and that we're talking with our staff and truly trying to understand and when we come to the board with this resolution to really have a transition plan that makes sense and that has received community input. And so, yes, we want to make sure that we have the amount of time to do it right. That is our commitment.
Okay. Melissa, the last question that just popped up from Mr. Singh.
Absolutely. Are the meetings next week and after just a repeat of this?
So
I can answer it too.
Either way, go ahead.
Yes, so we've structured these in a way where we know that the timing, finding the right time for everyone to attend is difficult. So we have one today that is lunch hour. We have one next week that's in the evening when we generally have board work sessions. And then we have one the following, or that Saturday morning, a week from Saturday, to try to make it as accessible as possible. And then we're recording all of these and posting them and then gathering frequently asked questions. So yes, the content of the presentations is the same, but the engagement and who attends and what questions are asked may be different.
Well said, Melissa. Thank you. Are there any other questions? I see Christy, you still have your hand raised. Do you have another question?
Sorry, no.
Okay. All right, I'll give a little bit of time. If there are any additional hands or any additional questions that you want to put in the chat, I'll give you everybody a minute or so. And then we'll kind of move from there. We've got about 7 minutes left in this scheduled conversation today. And again, if people are waiting and considering either writing something in the chat or raising your hand, no, as we presented earlier on in the presentation, and I know that it was also shared by our communications team in the chat, there is a form that you can go to, you can click on, you can share additional thoughts, questions, comments about any of these 3 topics that we've shared today. We encourage you to do that. We realize that in this short period of time that everything's not going to come to your mind that you might want to ask or say today. So you can always come back to that. Again, thank you for putting that back in the chat. So again, just know that this is not the only opportunity. You do have an opportunity through the forums, and as Melissa just stated, you can join us for any of our following 2 community conversations we have coming up next week. If additional questions or comments regarding these 3 topics come to mind and you'd like to share that in this forum. All right, I'm not seeing any additional chats. Oh, is this link on the KID webpage? Is that the KID webpage or the KSD webpage? Yes, got it. KSD webpage.
Prior to the meeting today, we had not posted the form link yet, but we will get that up today.
Great question. Any other questions? I want to respect everyone's time and give everyone an opportunity if they have any last thoughts or questions before we call this meeting to a close. Again, there are several other opportunities. We encourage your voice as well as your friends and community members, as well as KSD employees who are not able to be here today, to join us at one of the next 2 sessions, or also join us via the KSD website and the forums. So your opinion and your comments and your perspective matter. So we appreciate you taking the time to join us today. I wish everybody a great rest of your Thursday afternoon. And thank you very much.